The wind whispered through the dense forest, sending shivers down Mark's spine as he navigated the winding road. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape and painting the trees in shades of silver and shadow. As Mark drove deeper into the night, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly before him, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of the wilderness. The only sounds were the soft hum of his engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. With each passing mile, a sense of unease settled over Mark like a suffocating blanket. The darkness pressed in on him from all sides, filling him with a primal sense of dread that he couldn't shake. Just when he thought he couldn't bear the silence any longer, a figure stepped out onto the road ahead, illuminated by the dim glow of his headlights. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he slammed on the brakes, his car skidding to a halt just inches from the mysterious stranger. It was a woman, her features obscured by the shadows, her long hair blowing in the wind. She stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Mark with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. For a moment, Mark hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then, with a surge of courage, he rolled down his window and called out to her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. The woman said nothing, her gaze unwavering as she continued to stare at him with unblinking eyes. Feeling a shiver run down his spine, Mark tried again. "Do you need help? Are you lost?" Still, the woman remained silent, her expression unreadable in the darkness. Growing frustrated, Mark reached for his phone to call for assistance. But as he dialed the number, a sudden gust of wind extinguished his headlights, plunging him into darkness. Heart pounding, Mark fumbled for his flashlight, casting its feeble beam into the night. But when he turned back to the road, the woman was gone, vanished into thin air like a ghost in the night. Shaken but determined to press on, Mark restarted his car and continued down the road, the darkness closing in around him like a living thing. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden terrors, every whisper of the wind a sinister omen of things to come. And then, just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, Mark spotted something up ahead, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, its form hunched and twisted in the darkness. Heart pounding, Mark slowed his car to a stop, his breath catching in his throat as he watched the figure slowly approach. It was the woman from before, her features contorted into a grotesque mask of rage and despair. With a cry of terror, Mark slammed on the gas, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped away into the night. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that the woman was still there, her haunting gaze following him wherever he went. As the hours passed and the night wore on, Mark's fear only grew stronger, his mind consumed by thoughts of the mysterious woman and the horrors that lurked in the darkness. But just when he thought he couldn't bear it any longer, he spotted a glimmer of light on the horizon, a small town nestled among the trees, its windows glowing warmly in the night. With a sense of relief flooding through him, Mark pulled into the town, his heart pounding with anticipation as he sought refuge from the darkness that had pursued him for so long. But as he stepped out of his car and made his way towards the nearest house, a sudden chill ran down his spine, and he realized with a sinking feeling that the town was deserted, that he was completely and utterly alone in the darkness. With a sense of dread creeping over him, Mark stumbled back to his car, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty. And as he drove away from the town, the darkness seemed to close in around him once more, swallowing him whole in its suffocating embrace. For in the heart of the night, where the shadows reign supreme and the spirits of the dead roam free, there is no escape from the horrors that lurk in the darkness. And as Mark's screams echoed through the night, swallowed up by the endless expanse of trees, he knew that he was doomed to wander these haunted woods for all eternity, a lost soul trapped in a never-ending nightmare of darkness and despair. As Mark continued his journey through the desolate woods, a sense of desperation settled over him like a heavy shroud. Every shadow seemed to conceal unseen horrors, and every rustle of leaves sent a shiver down his spine. Despite his fear, Mark pushed on, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. But no matter how fast he drove or how far he traveled, the darkness seemed to stretch on endlessly before him, a never-ending labyrinth of terror. Suddenly, a blinding light pierced the darkness, causing Mark to slam on the brakes in surprise. As his eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness, he realized with a surge of relief that he had stumbled upon a small roadside diner, its neon sign flickering invitingly in the night. With a sense of hope rekindled in his heart, Mark pulled into the diner's parking lot, the warm glow of the lights washing over him like a comforting embrace. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the welcoming scent of freshly brewed coffee and the friendly chatter of the patrons. Feeling a sense of relief wash over him, Mark approached the counter and ordered a cup of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he waited for his drink. As he sipped the hot liquid, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards the kind-hearted waitress who had served him. But just as he began to relax, a sudden chill ran down his spine, and he realized with a sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. The diner had fallen silent, the friendly chatter replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. With a growing sense of unease, Mark glanced around the diner, his eyes widening in horror as he realized that the other patrons had disappeared, leaving him alone in the darkness once more. Heart pounding, Mark stumbled towards the door, his hands shaking as he fumbled for the handle. But before he could make his escape, a voice spoke out from the darkness, freezing him in his tracks. "You can't leave," the voice whispered, its words dripping with malice. "You belong to us now." With a cry of terror, Mark turned and fled into the night, his footsteps echoing through the empty diner like a death knell. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being pursued, that something sinister was hot on his trail, waiting to claim him as its next victim. As he disappeared into the darkness, his screams echoed through the night, swallowed up by the endless expanse of trees. And as the last echoes of his terror faded away, the diner stood silent and empty once more, a grim reminder of the horrors that lurk in the darkness, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting souls in their sinister grasp. As Mark fled into the darkness, his heart pounding with fear, he pushed himself to keep running, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The woods seemed to close in around him, the branches clawing at his clothes as if trying to drag him back into their sinister embrace. But Mark refused to give up. With every ounce of strength he had left, he pushed himself forward, driven by the primal instinct to survive. He had to find a way out of this nightmare, no matter the cost. As he ran, a flicker of light caught his eye, a small clearing up ahead, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. With a surge of hope, Mark sprinted towards it, his footsteps echoing through the silent forest. As he reached the edge of the clearing, Mark skidded to a halt, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing before him was a towering figure, its form shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark realized that he had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. The figure before him was not human, it was something ancient and malevolent, a being of pure darkness that hungered for his soul. With a cry of terror, Mark turned to flee, but it was too late. The creature lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Mark felt a searing pain rip through his side as he stumbled backwards, his vision swimming with agony. But even as he fell to the ground, battered and broken, Mark refused to give up. With the last of his strength, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small lighter, its flame flickering weakly in the darkness. With a defiant roar, Mark ignited the lighter, its feeble glow pushing back the shadows and illuminating the creature before him. And in that moment of clarity, he saw the truth: the creature was not invincible, it was not unbeatable. It was merely a trick of the darkness, a shadow born from fear and despair. With a surge of determination, Mark thrust the flame forward, its light burning bright against the darkness. And as the creature recoiled in horror, its form dissipating like smoke in the wind, Mark knew that he had won. He had conquered his fear, and he had emerged victorious against all odds. As the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, casting its warm glow over the clearing, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced his deepest fears and emerged stronger for it, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. With a weary smile, Mark closed his eyes and let the light of the rising sun wash over him, banishing the shadows of the night and heralding the dawn of a new day. And as he drifted into a well-earned sleep, he knew that he would never again be afraid to face the darkness, for he had learned that even in the darkest of nights, there is always a glimmer of hope, a light that shines bright even in the blackest of shadows, guiding the wayward traveler home. As Mark basked in the warmth of the rising sun, a sense of peace enveloped him, soothing the wounds of his harrowing ordeal. He lay in the clearing, feeling the gentle caress of the morning breeze against his skin, grateful for the newfound lightness that filled his heart. As he slowly regained his strength, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment: the terror of the night, the relentless pursuit of darkness, and the ultimate triumph of courage over fear. He knew that he had faced his darkest demons and emerged victorious, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. With a renewed sense of purpose, Mark rose to his feet, ready to continue his journey with newfound resolve. He had emerged from the depths of despair, and he was determined to live each moment to its fullest, embracing the light that had banished the shadows of his past. As he walked through the forest, the trees seemed to sway in silent reverence, their branches reaching towards the sky like outstretched arms. Mark felt a sense of kinship with the ancient woods, a bond forged through adversity and triumph. And as he emerged from the forest into the light of day, Mark knew that he had been forever changed by his ordeal. He had faced the darkness head-on and emerged stronger for it, ready to embrace the challenges that lay ahead with courage and resilience. With a smile on his lips and a newfound sense of purpose in his heart, Mark set out into the world, his spirit unbroken and his resolve unwavering. For in the heart of darkness, where nightmares lurk and shadows dance, there is always a glimmer of hope, a light that shines bright even in the blackest of nights, guiding the wayward traveler home. And as Mark disappeared into the light of the rising sun, his footsteps echoing through the silent forest, he knew that he would never again be afraid to face the darkness, for he had learned that even in the depths of despair, there is always a light to guide the way. As Mark ventured forth into the dawn, a renewed sense of purpose surged through him, invigorating his every step. Each stride carried him further from the shadows of the night, propelling him towards a future filled with endless possibilities. With the sun at his back and the wind at his face, Mark embraced the open road with newfound determination. He knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, but he faced them head-on, fueled by the memory of his triumph over darkness. As he drove, the landscape unfolded before him like a canvas painted with the vibrant hues of dawn. The world seemed alive with possibility, each moment brimming with the promise of adventure and discovery. And as Mark disappeared over the horizon, his car cutting through the open road like a sleek arrow in flight, he knew that he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. For in the heart of every adventure, there is a thrill that can only be found in the unknown, a rush of excitement that ignites the soul and drives the spirit ever onward. With a grin on his face and a song in his heart, Mark embraced the endless possibilities of the road ahead, knowing that no matter where his journey took him, he would always carry with him the courage and strength forged in the fires of darkness. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm glow over the world below, Mark disappeared into the horizon, a lone traveler on a quest for freedom, adventure, and the thrill of the open road. The old highway stretched out like a ribbon of darkness, winding its way through the heart of the forest. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white with tension as he navigated the twisting road. It was well past midnight, and the dense canopy of trees overhead cast the road into an impenetrable darkness. The only illumination came from Mark's headlights, their feeble beams struggling to penetrate the thick veil of night. As he drove on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. The forest seemed to press in on him from all sides, its towering trees looming like silent sentinels, watching his every move with unblinking eyes. Just when Mark thought he couldn't bear the oppressive silence any longer, he heard a faint rustling in the underbrush, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the darkness. His heart pounding in his chest, Mark glanced nervously into his rearview mirror, half expecting to see some malevolent figure lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. But the road behind him was empty, shrouded in an impenetrable darkness that seemed to swallow up everything in its path. With a shaky breath, Mark forced himself to focus on the road ahead, pushing aside the creeping sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm him. But no matter how fast he drove or how far he traveled, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that something sinister was lurking just out of sight, waiting for its chance to strike. Suddenly, a figure loomed out of the darkness, causing Mark to slam on the brakes in a panic. His headlights illuminated a woman standing in the middle of the road, her long hair blowing in the wind, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. Frozen in terror, Mark watched as the woman slowly approached his car, her movements graceful yet unnaturally fluid. His breath caught in his throat as she reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against the cold glass of his window. With a jolt, Mark snapped out of his trance, fumbling for the gearshift as he desperately tried to put some distance between himself and the spectral figure. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that the woman was still there, her haunting gaze following him wherever he went. As the hours passed and the night dragged on, Mark felt a growing sense of unease settle over him like a suffocating blanket. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden terrors, every whisper of the wind a sinister omen of things to come. But just when Mark thought he couldn't take it anymore, he saw a flicker of light in the distance, a beacon of hope cutting through the darkness like a ray of sunshine on a stormy day. It was a small roadside diner, its neon sign casting a warm glow over the deserted parking lot. With a sense of relief flooding through him, Mark pulled into the diner's parking lot, his tires crunching against the gravel as he came to a stop. He stepped out of his car, the cool night air washing over him like a balm, banishing the lingering shadows of fear that had haunted him throughout the night. Inside the diner, Mark found solace in the warm embrace of familiar faces and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. He recounted his harrowing tale to the patrons and staff alike, their eyes widening in disbelief as they listened to his account of the spectral woman and the horrors of the night. But as the night wore on and the hour grew late, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness still held secrets yet to be revealed, that the spectral figure he had encountered on the road was only the beginning of a much larger, much more sinister mystery. And as he stepped back out into the night, the cold chill of fear once again gripping his heart, Mark knew that his journey was far from over, that the road ahead was fraught with dangers beyond his wildest imagination, waiting to ensnare him in their icy grasp. But armed with the courage born of survival and the knowledge that he was not alone in his struggle against the darkness, Mark set out once more into the night, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead, determined to uncover the truth behind the mysteries that haunted the lonely highways and forgotten byways of the world. For in the heart of darkness, where nightmares lurk and shadows dance, there is always a glimmer of hope, a light that shines bright even in the blackest of nights, guiding the wayward traveler home. And as Mark drove off into the unknown, his headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope in a sea of despair, he knew that no matter how terrifying the journey may be, he would never walk alone, for the light of courage and the warmth of companionship would always be there to light his way. As Mark continued his journey into the night, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly before him, twisting and turning through the desolate landscape like a serpent slithering through the shadows. With each passing mile, the sense of foreboding grew stronger, weighing heavily on his mind like a dark cloud looming on the horizon. As the clock ticked past midnight, Mark found himself driving through a remote stretch of countryside, far removed from civilization. The only signs of life were the occasional flickering lights of distant farmhouses, their windows glowing like beacons in the night. But even the comforting sight of human habitation couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gripped Mark's heart. It was as if the darkness itself had taken on a life of its own, twisting and writhing with unseen malevolence, waiting to ensnare him in its icy embrace. Suddenly, Mark's headlights caught sight of something up ahead, a figure standing by the side of the road, its form shrouded in darkness. As he drew closer, Mark's blood ran cold at the sight of the spectral woman, her eyes burning like twin orbs of fire in the night. With a gasp, Mark slammed on the brakes, his car screeching to a halt just a few feet away from the mysterious figure. He watched in horror as the woman slowly turned to face him, her ghostly visage contorted into a twisted smile that sent shivers down his spine. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as Mark and the woman locked eyes, the air thick with unspoken dread. And then, with a suddenness that took his breath away, the woman vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the echo of her chilling laughter. Shaken to his core, Mark sat trembling behind the wheel, his mind reeling from the encounter. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something beyond the realm of human understanding, something ancient and primal that lurked in the darkest recesses of the world. With a shaky breath, Mark forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He needed to get out of there, to put as much distance between himself and whatever malevolent force had just crossed his path. With a prayer on his lips, he put the car into gear and pressed down on the accelerator, his tires spinning wildly as he sped away into the night. But no matter how fast he drove, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pursued, that something dark and sinister was hot on his trail, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as he drove on into the unknown, his heart heavy with fear, he knew that the horrors of the night were far from over, and that the road ahead would be fraught with peril at every turn. As Mark drove further into the night, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, each passing mile feeling like an eternity. The forest loomed on either side of the highway, its dense foliage casting long, eerie shadows that danced in the dim glow of his headlights. With every turn of the road, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes followed his every move from the darkness beyond the trees. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out across his brow as he fought to keep his composure. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Mark's eye, a figure darting across the road ahead, barely visible in the fleeting illumination of his headlights. His heart leaped into his throat as he slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt as his car skidded to a halt. Heart pounding, Mark peered into the darkness, straining to catch another glimpse of the mysterious figure. But the road lay empty before him, silent and still, as if nothing had ever crossed its path. Trembling, Mark forced himself to continue driving, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty. What had he seen? Was it merely a trick of the light, or something far more sinister? As he drove on, the night seemed to grow darker, the shadows closing in around him like a suffocating embrace. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of the wind sent a shiver down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone on that desolate road. And then, just when he thought he couldn't bear the tension any longer, he heard a soft, plaintive wail echoing through the night, chilling him to the bone. His blood ran cold as he realized that it was the sound of a woman's voice, calling out to him from the darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark knew that he had to investigate, that he couldn't ignore the desperate plea for help. But as he stepped out of his car and ventured into the forest, the darkness seemed to swallow him whole, enveloping him in a suffocating blanket of fear. Branches clawed at his clothes, and unseen roots tripped him up at every turn as he pressed deeper into the heart of the forest. The woman's cries grew louder with each step, guiding him like a beacon through the impenetrable darkness. And then, just when he thought he couldn't go on any longer, Mark stumbled into a small clearing, his breath catching in his throat at the sight before him. There, standing in the center of the clearing, was the woman from the road, her ghostly form bathed in an ethereal glow. With a trembling hand, Mark reached out to her, his heart overflowing with compassion and concern. But as his fingers brushed against her cold, clammy skin, he recoiled in horror, realizing with a sinking feeling that she was not what she seemed. For in that moment, the woman's features contorted into a grotesque mask of rage and malice, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. And as she lunged at him with inhuman speed, Mark knew that he was face to face with a force beyond his comprehension, a malevolent spirit hell-bent on dragging him down into the depths of despair. With a cry of terror, Mark turned and fled into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest as he ran for his life. Behind him, he could hear the woman's unearthly shrieks echoing through the night, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. But no matter how fast he ran, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was running in circles, that the forest itself was conspiring against him, leading him further and further away from safety. And as he stumbled and fell, his strength draining away with each passing second, he knew that he was doomed to wander these haunted woods for all eternity, a lost soul trapped in a never-ending nightmare of darkness and despair. For in the heart of the forest, where the shadows dance and the spirits roam free, there is no escape from the horrors that lurk in the darkness. And as Mark's screams faded into the night, swallowed up by the endless expanse of trees, he knew that he would never again see the light of day. As Mark ran blindly through the tangled undergrowth, the oppressive darkness seemed to swallow him whole, engulfing him in a suffocating embrace. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of terror. With each passing moment, the forest grew denser, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out to ensnare him in their gnarled embrace. Mark's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. As he struggled to his feet, his eyes darted frantically around him, searching for any sign of escape. But all he could see was an endless sea of trees, stretching out in every direction like an impenetrable wall of darkness. Panic surged through Mark's veins as he realized that he was hopelessly lost, trapped in this nightmarish labyrinth with no way out. The woman's unearthly shrieks echoed through the forest, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment, driving him ever deeper into the heart of darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark knew that he was running out of time, that if he didn't find a way to escape soon, he would be lost to the darkness forever. Drawing upon the last reserves of his strength, he pushed himself to his feet and stumbled forward, determined to find a way out of this living nightmare. Suddenly, a glimmer of light caught Mark's eye, a faint flicker of flame dancing on the edge of his vision. With a surge of hope, he followed the light, pushing through the dense underbrush with renewed determination. And then, just when he thought he couldn't go on any longer, Mark burst into a small clearing, his heart leaping with joy at the sight before him. There, nestled among the trees, was a small cabin bathed in the warm glow of firelight, its welcoming facade a beacon of hope in the sea of darkness. With a cry of relief, Mark stumbled towards the cabin, his strength failing him with every step. But as he reached out to open the door, a cold chill ran down his spine, and he hesitated, his hand hovering inches from the latch. Something wasn't right. The air seemed to hum with an electric energy, and a sense of foreboding settled over Mark like a heavy shroud. But before he could turn back, the door creaked open of its own accord, revealing a dimly lit interior shrouded in shadow. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him with a resounding thud. And as he stood alone in the darkness, the woman's unearthly laughter echoing in his ears, he knew that he had fallen into a trap from which there was no escape. For in the heart of the forest, where the shadows reign supreme and the spirits of the dead roam free, there is no refuge from the horrors that lurk in the darkness. And as Mark's cries for help faded into the night, swallowed up by the endless expanse of trees, he knew that he was doomed to wander these haunted woods for all eternity, a lost soul trapped in a never-ending nightmare of darkness and despair. With a surge of determination, Mark refused to succumb to the paralyzing fear that threatened to consume him. Drawing upon every ounce of courage he possessed, he confronted the darkness head-on, refusing to be a victim of its sinister machinations. As he stood in the cabin, surrounded by shadows that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, Mark's mind raced with thoughts of escape. He scanned the room frantically, searching for any means of breaking free from this nightmarish prison. And then, his eyes fell upon a small window at the far end of the cabin, its glass panes coated with a thick layer of dust. With a glimmer of hope igniting in his chest, Mark raced towards the window, his heart pounding with anticipation. With trembling hands, he pushed open the window, the cool night air rushing in to greet him like a breath of freedom. Without hesitation, he hoisted himself up onto the windowsill and squeezed through the narrow opening, his heart soaring with relief as he tumbled out into the night. For a moment, Mark lay sprawled on the forest floor, his body aching from the ordeal he had endured. But as he struggled to his feet, he knew that he couldn't afford to rest, not when his life still hung in the balance. With renewed determination, Mark set off into the darkness, his eyes fixed on the distant glow of the moon hanging low on the horizon. Every step brought him closer to freedom, closer to escaping the clutches of the darkness that had threatened to consume him. But just as he thought he had finally outrun his tormentors, a sudden movement caught his eye, a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark realized that he was not alone, that the spirits of the forest still hunted him, their thirst for vengeance as insatiable as ever. With a cry of defiance, Mark pressed on, his resolve unshakable even in the face of overwhelming odds. He knew that he had to keep moving, to fight with every fiber of his being until he had finally broken free from the darkness that sought to destroy him. And as he disappeared into the night, his footsteps fading into the distance, Mark knew that he would never again be the same, that he had faced his deepest fears and emerged stronger for it, ready to confront whatever horrors awaited him on the road ahead. For in the heart of darkness, where nightmares reign supreme and the line between reality and illusion blurs, there is always hope, a flickering flame that burns bright even in the blackest of nights, guiding the wayward traveler home. And as Mark disappeared into the night, his spirit unbroken and his courage unwavering, he knew that he would never again be afraid to face the darkness head-on, armed with the knowledge that he had triumphed over evil and emerged victorious against all odds. As Mark drove down the dark, winding road that cut through the dense forest, he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. The only source of light was his dim headlights, barely piercing the thick veil of darkness surrounding him. As he rounded a particularly sharp bend, Mark caught a glimpse of something in the periphery of his vision. He slammed on the brakes, heart racing, as his headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her long hair billowing in the wind. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he watched her slowly turn to face him, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of his headlights. Frozen in terror, Mark couldn't tear his gaze away from the woman's haunting stare. Without warning, she began to glide toward his car, her movements eerily graceful yet unnatural. Panic surged through Mark's veins as he fumbled for the gearshift, desperate to reverse and escape this nightmare. But before he could react, the woman vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the echo of her chilling laughter. Shaken to his core, Mark peeled out of there, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he raced away from the scene. But no matter how far he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something sinister lurked in the darkness just beyond his headlights. To this day, Mark refuses to drive alone at night, haunted by the memory of that spectral woman and the chilling encounter that still sends shivers down his spine. As Mark continued down the desolate road, his nerves frayed with every passing mile. The encounter with the mysterious woman had left him shaken, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. The dense forest seemed to press in on him from all sides, casting eerie shadows that danced in the faint glow of his headlights. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made Mark's heart skip a beat, his imagination running wild with terrifying possibilities. Suddenly, his headlights flickered, casting the road ahead into darkness for a brief, heart-stopping moment. Mark's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he frantically tried to regain control of his car. Just as the headlights flickered back to life, illuminating the road ahead once more, Mark caught sight of something in the distance. It was a figure, standing at the edge of the forest, its silhouette barely discernible against the backdrop of trees. As Mark drew closer, he realized with a sickening sense of dread that it was the same woman he had encountered earlier. She stood perfectly still, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. Unable to tear his gaze away, Mark felt a wave of terror wash over him as he realized that this was no ordinary encounter. There was something malevolent about the woman's presence, something that whispered of ancient, unfathomable horrors. Before Mark could react, the woman raised a hand and pointed a long, gnarled finger directly at him. And in that moment, he knew with bone-chilling certainty that he was not alone on the desolate road, that he was being hunted by something far more sinister than he could ever imagine. With a strangled cry, Mark slammed his foot on the accelerator, his car lurching forward as he raced away from the looming figure in the darkness. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being pursued, that something otherworldly was hot on his trail, waiting to claim him as its next victim. As dawn broke on the horizon, casting its warm light over the deserted road, Mark finally dared to breathe a sigh of relief. But deep down, he knew that the horrors of that night would haunt him forever, a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in the darkness, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting souls in their sinister grasp. Exhausted and trembling, Mark finally reached the outskirts of a small town. He pulled into the first gas station he saw, the neon lights buzzing eerily in the early morning darkness. Stepping out of his car, Mark felt the weight of the night's event settle heavily on his shoulders. His hands shook as he reached for his wallet to pay for gas, the memory of the woman's haunting stare still fresh in his mind. The gas station attendant gave him a curious look as Mark approached the counter, no doubt noticing the pallor of fear that clung to him like a second skin. Mark tried to brush off the encounter as a trick of the mind, a figment of his overactive imagination, but deep down, he knew that what he had witnessed was all too real. As he drove away from the gas station, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the deserted streets, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced nervously into his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman's ghostly figure lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. But the road behind him was empty, stretching out into the distance without a trace of the supernatural horrors that had plagued him throughout the night. With a sigh of relief, Mark turned his attention back to the road ahead, determined to put the nightmare behind him once and for all. But deep down, he knew that some nightmares never truly end, that they linger in the darkest corners of the mind, waiting to resurface when least expected, ready to drag their victims back into the depths of terror from which they had escaped. And as Mark drove into the sunrise, leaving the horrors of the night behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the true horrors were yet to come, lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting for their chance to strike once again. As Mark drove further away from the forest and the eerie encounters of the night, he couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that clung to him like a heavy cloak. Despite the comforting light of day filtering through the trees, a lingering sense of unease gnawed at his insides. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, noting with a sinking feeling that it was already past 6 a.m. He had been driving for hours, yet it felt like an eternity since he first encountered the spectral woman on that desolate road. Desperate for a distraction, Mark turned on the radio, hoping that the upbeat music and cheerful voices of the morning DJs would chase away the lingering shadows of fear that clouded his mind. But even the familiar tunes couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that he was still being watched, still being pursued by forces beyond his comprehension. As he drove on, the road stretched out endlessly before him, winding its way through sleepy towns and forgotten hamlets. But no matter how far he traveled, Mark couldn't escape the feeling that he was being drawn inexorably toward some unseen destination, that the horrors of the night were still lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting for their chance to strike once again. And as the day wore on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, Mark couldn't shake the sinking feeling that he was running out of time, that whatever malevolent force had set its sights on him was closing in, its icy grip tightening with every passing mile. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Mark realized that he was no longer in control, that he was merely a pawn in a game played by forces far beyond his understanding. And as the road stretched out endlessly before him, disappearing into the distance like a ribbon of asphalt leading to oblivion, he knew that there was no turning back, that his fate was sealed, and that the horrors of the night would soon claim him as their own. Just as Mark's resolve began to falter and despair threatened to consume him, he spotted a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Up ahead, he saw the flashing lights of a police car parked by the side of the road, its presence like a beacon of salvation cutting through the darkness. With renewed determination, Mark sped towards the police car, his heart pounding with anticipation. He skidded to a halt beside the cruiser, the officer inside emerging to investigate the commotion. Breathless and trembling, Mark spilled out his tale of the night's horrors, of the spectral woman who haunted the lonely roads, and the sinister forces that pursued him relentlessly. To his surprise, the officer listened intently, his expression grave as he took in Mark's harrowing account. Without hesitation, the officer radioed for backup, his voice crackling with urgency as he relayed Mark's story to his colleagues. Together, they would scour the surrounding area, searching for any sign of the malevolent presence that had terrorized Mark throughout the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted road, Mark felt a glimmer of hope flicker within him. Perhaps he wasn't alone in this fight, perhaps there were others who would stand beside him against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. With the support of the police, Mark set out once more into the night, his fear tempered by a newfound sense of determination. And as he drove into the unknown, ready to confront whatever horrors lay ahead, he knew that he would never again be afraid to face the darkness head-on, armed with the knowledge that he was not alone in his struggle against the forces of evil.